Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Elizabeth Stevens, and I have the honor of serving as president of the Downtown Mobile Alliance, a nonprofit working to accelerate the revitalization of downtown Mobile. Of course, tonight we're all hunkered down for Hurricane Zeta and hoping for a very light brush with hopefully the last hurricane of the season. But we sure are glad that you're spending your Zeta evening with us tonight and thinking about how we can ever improve our city and the design and beauty of our city with this illustrious team. Now, one advantage to doing this call by Zoom, although we would love to be in person with you, is that when a hurricane comes, we don't have to cancel, and we don't have the disadvantage of these fine people having come to town and not be able to do their presentation. So we're all here via the technology of the year. And the other great thing about doing this as a Zoom call is that it's recorded. So we will be sharing the link to the Zoom call tomorrow on our website, downtownmobile.org. There's a landing page for optimizing our streets. Also on that page is the opportunity to submit questions, comments, etc. And that will be live throughout this entire 3 or 4 month process. Now, tonight on this specific Zoom, if you scroll across the bottom, you will see that there's a Q&A option. You may also pose questions or comments in that tonight. And then later at the end of the presentation, if there's time, Jeff will try to address some of those. And we certainly will be able to have those Q&As for look and review throughout the process. So 2 options for comments, one, the website, downtownmobile.org, and then also tonight on the Q&A tab. Now, as I said, we're calling this effort Optimizing Our Streets, Design for Safety and Development. And the Alliance has engaged Speck and Associates, partnering with the transportation firm Nelson Nygaard, to do an analysis of every street downtown and provide recommendations of how we can design and manage each street from the perspective of creating walkable, vibrant downtown. Now, Jeff Speck has long been on our radar. His book, Walkable City, is quite well done, and we provide a copy to all new employees as well as new trustees of our board, and strongly encourage them to read it. We also randomly will buy some and throw them in our little free library. So we have hopefully a well-read citizenry of Walkable City aficionados throughout our town. His brother Scott Speck is our beloved conductor of the Mobile Symphony. And 2 years ago, Jeff was the speaker, much enjoyed speaker at the Downtown Alliance annual luncheon. Last year we began talking, Jeff and I did, about the idea of doing some kind of study. He calls it a walkability study for the downtown. This idea of how can the streets contribute to the development of downtown? How can we make them safe, but well used, and so that the properties downtown can be used to their fullest. Now, our city, like most, gave up on downtown for much other than office buildings and pursued a transportation ethos that prioritized moving cars efficiently into and out of downtown. That was, probably 40, 50 years ago. That seemed logical until as a city we wound up really nearly at death's door. Fortunately, there were many, many faithful souls who just would not give up on downtown Mobile, and people just kept insisting that this 300-year-old city could and would be vibrant if we just did a few things right. One group of believers would be the trustees of the J.L. Bedsole Foundation. The foundation has long supported major initiatives that bring life and beauty to downtown. Optimizing Our Streets is the latest initiative of ours, receiving financial support from the Bedsole Foundation. Chris Lee is the executive director of the J.L. Bedsole Foundation and has graciously offered his time to chair our Optimizing Our Streets steering committee. And Chris is joining us tonight and has a few welcome comments for you. Chris?
Thank you, Elizabeth. And on behalf of the Distribution Committee of the J.L. Betzel Foundation, we're really honored to be a part of this effort. The time is right. Downtown has come a long way. We know it has a long way to go, but the leadership is right, right from the mayor's office to Elizabeth's organization, the boards that are engaged, the investors that are coming up. So we want to thank all of you for participating, and we really value your input this week. And we're really, really excited to be able to work with Jeff and Allison. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you over to Jeff Speck. Jeff?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I have unmuted, and I will begin my show because I understand that you can still see me as I show my screen. So I will do that. Excellent. Can you all see that? Give me a thumbs up, Allison. Okay. Well, thank you so much to Downtown Mobile. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks to the Betzel Foundation for sponsoring this work. It's great to be back in Mobile, except I'm not back in Mobile. And one of the things that excited me about taking on this project was the opportunity to spend some real time in town, spend time with my brother, and enjoy a urban realm, which is quite delightful, particularly as the weather gets colder. I was hoping to be there. I'm not there. I have to apologize for that. I was there, as Elizabeth mentioned, almost exactly 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago. It's funny, it feels like yesterday. I mean, it surprised me to learn it was that long ago. And actually, it's only because I was there and I've been there before and I've spent a good amount of time there, thanks to my brother, that I was willing to take on this project remotely. City planning is really about place, and the tools that we have at our disposal are spectacular. It's fair to say that we could not do this project the way we're going to do it as little as 10 years ago. But now we do have the tools that allow us to do this well, I think, remotely. But also because I know the city pretty well, when I'm looking at the Google, I'm not just looking at the Google, I have memories of walking the streets and being on the streets. And hopefully we can appear in person at some point in the near future, but it's not going to be right now. So forgive the format. Zoom is getting tiresome, but it is effective. And we've actually been running a lot of projects this way lately, and we appreciate your playing along. I was asked to introduce my firm. I think many of you know me already from the presentation that I gave at Downtown Mobile. And you're going to get to know the work that I've done a bit. If you didn't, you're going to get to know it through this presentation. So I don't need to say too much about my firm, except that really since 1993 full-time and 1989 part-time, I've been doing city planning work. And I do all kinds of different projects. I've probably led or managed about 100 different projects so far in my career, which means I'm getting old or older. You may know Rosemary Beach in the near Seaside, which I managed. Other projects like Kentlands in Washington, D.C., where I kind of cut my teeth as a town architect when I was in school. Projects in Mexico, projects in Belgium, just around the world, and a lot of city center downtown work. And even more so when I started my own firm, Speck & Associates, I really do mostly downtown stuff. And I'll talk more about that through my show. But of course, my greatest qualification is my brother, Scott, who's watching tonight. Hello, Scott, you're muted. But he, as you know, as I mentioned, has brought me and my family to Mobile many times, and makes me feel that this is a job that I really want to do and do well. And if I don't do well, you can blame him and run him out of town. So I wanted to introduce my partners, Nelson Nygaard, led by Allison Fletcher. Nelson Nygaard, I'm a city planner. I'm trained as an architect. I'm a huge hobbyist when it comes to traffic planning and transportation planning and even traffic engineering, if you can say that I'm a traffic engineer as a hobby, but I don't have the credential. You know, my work is not focused on traffic. When you redesign streets, you need to get the traffic right, because for better or for worse, it's what people in cities seem to care the most about. So of the work I've done, about a dozen projects have been specifically walkability studies or other sort of work that redesigns downtown streets. And on almost all of them, I've teamed up with the partners and associates at Nelson Nygaard, which is, in my opinion, they happen to have a Boston office, which makes it very convenient to me. But in my opinion, they're the best transportation planning firm working in the country. Allison can tell you more about the firm itself. But we're just so used to working together, and Allison and I worked most recently together on projects in Arkansas, in Oklahoma, other places, but we're a very comfortable team, and I will stop my share and let her introduce herself, and she's also managing the show tonight.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm just going to get my slides pulled up here. My introduction to our firm. Are you seeing my slides now? Yes.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little bit shorter than Jeff's, but as Jeff said, we work together on a lot of projects, and we work on transportation of all forms. My name is Allison, as Jeff said. We collaborate on projects across the country, and Nelson Nygaard specifically has offices around the country as well. We work in hundreds and hundreds of cities and on all forms of transportation, from transit plans to walkability plans to bikes and bike trail plans. And we do a lot of street engineering and parking and transportation demand management. I've actually got a couple of people from our team here in the audience today, too, that are helping support this effort. So thanks to them. But as Jeff mentioned, we've worked together on a number of plans throughout the country. So I've also had the great privilege of following Jeff around as we walk streets, which is usually in person. This is a picture of Jeff when we were touring downtown Tulsa. This is actually at rush hour, lying down in the middle of one of the streets. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass it over to Jeff so he can get to talking about Mobile, but that's just a little bit of introduction to us and our collaboration working together.
I was trying to demonstrate how little traffic they had there, and I think I was effective. So the discussion I want to have tonight is something that I talk about in my book, Walkable City, and has to do with how we make your downtown more vital. Obviously, it's come a long way in recent years, but we're helping you out because the perception is it could come further. And when I do a walkability study or I talk about walkability, I ask the question, which is the kind of foundation of what I call my general theory of walkability, how do you get people to walk? And I talk about how you have to do four things simultaneously. The walk has to be useful, it has to be safe, it has to be comfortable, and it has to be interesting. You're getting the useful walk, the comfortable walk, and the interesting walk pretty well in downtown Mobile. It's a function principally of the buildings that line the streets, and it's the stuff that evolves slowly over time. If you have a great historical heritage, as you do, the walk is much more useful and more interesting and comfortable, right? There are great buildings lining the street. But the safe walk is the part that is, I should say, easiest to fix. And it's the part that the city actually controls the best because it has to do specifically with the design of streets. And we've been hired for this particular effort for a number of reasons. Half because we wanted to focus on what was going to be most instrumental in changing downtown, and half because it just seemed the best opportunity. It was the thing that was the low-hanging fruit, was to look at how to make your streets safer. So I'm going to talk tonight, and some of this I went over. I was pleased to see that when I spoke 2 years ago to Downtown Mobile, a number of these items that I'm going to bring up I actually didn't raise. But what is it? What is it that makes for a safe walk in downtown? Now, I'm going to get more into this, the business impacts, but clearly when you make the walk downtown safer, you cause more people to walk downtown. Walkers are shoppers, walkers are diners, bikers too, more than drivers, are shoppers and diners. The more we can make the downtown more walkable, more bikeable, the more it will be the attractor of many people who will patronize your downtown and make it more successful. So the first thing to mention in terms of safety is, you know, we take it for granted, kind of. We all, well, I won't say we all drive, but many of us drive. And we kind of know that there's certain risks associated with driving, and there's risks associated with walking around people who are driving. And it's kind of this thing that we naturalize, you know, it's just part of our lives, and it's part of being human, or perhaps American, that we're risking our lives at times when we're driving or walking around cars. So people are sometimes surprised to learn that among, you know, developed nations, among modern nations, you're pretty much twice as likely to be killed by it. Now, we've gotten better, right? We've improved since the last time we tested it, but you're still about twice as likely to get killed because of a car in the US than these other places. But the same logic applies to cities themselves. So if you look at different cities across the US, your likelihood of being killed driving or walking around cars really depends on where you are. In New York, it's about 4 per 100,000 per year. In San Francisco, it's the same. Dallas is more than twice that, and Orlando doubles it again. And the lesson you learn from looking at these different cities is when was the city built? And is it principally highways, or is it principally narrow streets? How fast are people going when they're driving around that area? And the way your city is designed has a huge impact on that. Now, you noticed in that earlier chart that deaths have gone down due to vehicles every year. But the one thing that hasn't gone down is pedestrian deaths. And this is a longer conversation that it's not that helpful to discuss, because the principal cause is SUVs, which isn't a part of this study. But because SUVs hit you harder and heavier and higher, and you're more likely to fall under it as a pedestrian, we've literally seen over the past decade a 5% increase in pedestrian deaths every single year. So we're 50% higher than we were a decade ago, and it's just getting worse. And you know, what all this means is, of course, anything we can do to make it safer for pedestrians to walk around is important. And the most important thing we can do is change the environment in ways that if there are pedestrians around or cyclists, the drivers are encouraged to drive more slowly. A car going 35 miles an hour is about 7 times as likely to kill you as a car going 25 miles an hour. And you can see the difference between 30 and 20 is 9 times as much. And this range of speed from 20 to 40, where you're almost certain to survive or very likely going to die, that's the range of speeds that people drive at in your downtown. The question is, are they closer to the 20 or are they closer to the 40? And anything we can do to get them closer to the 20 is going to make your downtown safer. This is an old graph that I've been using for 15 years, and it was created by a colleague at Nelson Nygaard that long ago. And I think actually the more you think about this, the more powerful it is. Yes, the graphics could be better, but you know, most people's commute, only a very small amount of it is through the downtown core, right? The downtown core is less than a mile across, and most people are commuting more than a mile to work. And so it's really a difference whether you're speeding, you know, hightailing it dangerously through the downtown core, or you're driving a safe 20, 25 miles an hour, is only going to impact your commute by seconds on a commute that's many minutes long. And so the real question is it worth it to you? I'm always very honest and, you know, forthright about the trade-offs that we're looking at. Asking someone to drive through the downtown for, you know, a half a mile at a speed that's 20 miles an hour less, perhaps, does add seconds to their commute every day. But that's the price of having a downtown that's worth arriving in, right? That's safe and comfortable and pleasant to be in. And most people, when they understand the trade-offs, are willing to drive a little bit slower in order to have a city that they can be proud of. So the vitality that comes when streets are narrow, when cars are moving slowly, when the traffic is not a threat to the pedestrian is the other goal of this study. So what are the things, particularly in Mobile, and whenever I work in a place, I edit this list to the issues that are relevant to that city, but what are the things that make a street safer or less safe. Clearly no one's walking here, and nor should they, because this is a highway, but this slide reminds me that the number of lanes, of course, is a huge factor in how walkable a place is. The more lanes there are, the faster cars go because it feels more like a highway. The more lanes there are, the further you have to cross. And this is Oklahoma City about 12 years ago. And they had a lot going for them, but there were almost no shops. In fact, a taxi driver told me there was no shop in downtown Oklahoma City at this point. That was an exaggeration, but you can see why. If this is what the streets look like, and they were actually named by Prevention Magazine as the worst city for pedestrians in the entire country, which couldn't have been accurate, but that truly alarmed the mayor, who came running to me and said, "What can we do?" And I said, "Let's do a walkability study." And we looked at the traffic numbers in the downtown core, and you can read these off your screen, knowing that a typical two-lane street without turn lanes can easily handle 10,000 cars per day. No one disputes that. And we looked at these streets, and these were the streets that were designated in their plan to remain or be repaved at 4 to 6 lanes in width. And you can see the car counts. Only one of them perhaps might have needed a turn lane in certain locations. But these very low numbers made us realize there was this tremendous mismatch between supply of lanes and demand for lanes. And that's what we call kind of a lane audit. We say, okay, where do you possibly have some lanes that you don't need? Hudson was clearly well oversized. And fortunately, at the time of the study, Devon Energy decided to build this tower in the heart of downtown, which was generating $200 million in tax increment. And we asked the question, they asked the question, how can we spend this money? And they decided to spend it on the 40 blocks of downtown streets, rebuilding the streets from building face to building face. And my job was to redesign the curb to curb of these streets. Using up the extra travel lanes, I managed to double the amount of on-street parking, which of course the merchants loved. And I was able to create a bike network where there wasn't a bike network. So the typical street went from this, 4 lanes to T, to this, here it is under construction, or this major street through the downtown, Sheridan went from this to this, and this is what you do when you have money. I always say, most cities don't have money, and the real tool that we can use is paint, right? A new top coat and new paint allows you to improve safety almost as much as rebuilding. And in fact, you can restripe a whole downtown for the price of rebuilding just a few streets. So, this is one solution, and there might be a place for it, as I'll discuss, but we're gonna look at paint. So looking at your streets, I always like it when a place is making progress before I arrive. When I spoke in 2018, I noticed that there was temporary construction on Government Street that was narrowing it to 1 lane, and the traffic was, or 2 lanes versus 3, I should say, westbound, and the traffic was traveling just fine. And I said, why can't we bring parking back to this area? And here it is in the Google from 2 years ago, and here it is now. And the mayor embraced that, and they did it. There's still a couple blocks that are missing the parking, but you can see how much more livable those potential shops and offices are, with the cars protecting them from driving. It was an extra lane that the cars protecting them from moving vehicles. There was an extra lane they didn't need. And in fact, I heard from Fred at the Downtown Association that there was a lawyer who moved his offices out of either this building or nearby, who said, if I had known that parking was coming, I would not have done that. So hopefully we'll get more people back. And then looking now at the current plan, which is changeable for the western end, you need to rotate this, for 80 degrees. Looking at the western end of Government Street, you can see the current plan has lots of lanes. Do we really need 4 lanes heading westbound at the intersection with Broad? That's something we're going to look into, and that's why I have traffic planners on my team. And then you look at Canal Street, which is basically a 7-laner plus the access road along its north side. And you look at the traffic counts, and I'm not surprised to see 25 on Government, 25,000 cars a day, which suggests you need a significant number of lanes, but look at the counts on Canal, less than 5,000 cars per day. Theoretically, we only need half a lane in each direction on that street. So that's an opportunity. And as I understand it, the city is taking advantage of that extra space and already experimenting with some solutions. We're going to propose a solution for that. One-way streets, and specifically multi-lane one-way streets, of which you have a few. You have lots of one-way streets. A few of them are multi-lane. Those are also clearly less safe than the same width of street two-way. Because the cars are all going in the same direction, there's much more of a highway feel to driving. There's a tremendous amount of momentum happening all at once, one way. There's no opposing traffic to slow cars down. And there's this opportunity to jockey from lane to lane that doesn't happen if you've got for example, a two-lane street that's two-way. So there's been a lot of studies done. This is Louisville, Kentucky, where Brook Street, First Street, Second, and Third Street were all one way, and Brook and First were converted. I say reverted because they used to be two-way. Were reverted to two-way. Second and Third were kept as one way. The two ways, car crashes went down about by half, and even crime went down because now there was supervision of the buildings and the slots between the buildings from each side, so you couldn't hide between two buildings to do a drug deal or something else like that. Interestingly, on the one-ways, car crashes went up and crime went up. But the real story with these two-way reversions has to do with business. This is Vancouver, Washington. I need to get a better picture of this. This was a main street that struggled for many years. And I like to say they tried all the quick fixes of the 80s, the bricks, the berms, the banners, the bollards, the bandstands, and the balloons. And nothing brought this street back until they finally convinced the state DOT to make it two-way again. It's covered very well in this article in Governing Magazine from 2009 by Alan Ehrenholt, where he describes this thing that's happening even back then nationwide to bring downtowns back from the damage that they suffered when multi-lane two-way streets became one-way streets. One study that I have in my book, Walkable City, was of a street in Savannah that in 1969 was converted to one-way, like so many streets were. And almost immediately, about 64% of the tax-paying businesses on that street disappeared from the tax rolls. In 1990, they put it back to two-way, and pretty quickly, we percent more businesses on that street. People understand this in communities once they learn, once they see the examples. This was in New Albany, Indiana, where I'd given a talk, and then I made a plan to revert the entire downtown core from one-way travel. This is across the river from Louisville. The entire downtown from one-way travel to two-way travel. And the plan sat on a shelf for 2 years, and then it was implemented entirely in one summer. They did the whole thing. And, you know, I was pleased to see the police chief said he had never seen a better scenario for public safety. Speeds reduced, crashes down, and actually police and fire response times are faster because they don't have to circle. So that's been the experience in lots of different places. I'm going to be showing you a number of images from the very nice DPZ, Duane Plater-Zyberk downtown code that is now a few years old. I didn't stress enough, I spent 10 years and really learned my trade with Andres Duane and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk at DPZ from 1993 to 2003. This is the plan they did after I left, of course, for the downtown. And they're actually considering, the two-way streets that exist are in light blue. The two-way that are proposed are in dark blue, St. Anthony, Conti, and St. Joseph. And I think that actually we need to be skeptical about these in the sense that if it's not multi-lane, then you're really not suffering. And of course, you don't want to. I should say, if it's not multi-lane, there probably isn't that much speeding, and we don't want to remove parallel parking from business areas that need it. So Conti, I'm not so sure about, and then St. Anthony. Interestingly, it was two-lane. One direction, but recently the city started to allow people to park on it. And I think maybe one way with parking is a better solution than two-way without parking. We'll investigate that, and we'll make some proposals for that one. St. Joseph, I think clearly, here's a street that's 2 lanes wide plus room for parking. And I don't see why this should not be a 2-way street. And currently the city has retained engineers to study it. We will study it as well, but that looks like a good opportunity, really the one prime opportunity for reverting a street in downtown. And as you know, it's 2-way in one small location already. The next issue is the width of the lanes themselves. So how many lanes do you have? How wide are those lanes? Andres Duani used to show this slide and he'd say, the typical street to the typical subdivision in America is now wide enough to allow you to experience the curvature of the earth. And indeed, that is what has happened because the standards have just changed. Here's a subdivision from the 1980s. Here's one from, from the 1960s, and here's one from the 1980s. And even subsequently, the standards have just creeped wider and wider, such that my old street in Miami Beach, where I lived for a decade, when it was time to widen it when it was time to fix it because it wasn't draining properly, in our summer afternoon thunderstorms, there was a half a foot of water in the street. So they had to rebuild it, but they had to rebuild it to a new standard that removed half our sidewalk, removed all of our street trees, even though it was perfectly safe and fine before. We know what happens on wider streets. People go faster. The data is quite clear. The wider the lanes, the faster people drive. And thankfully now we have NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, saying straight out that in an urban location, right, a street that's a downtown street handling a lot of traffic, the standard is 10 feet. Now it used to be 10 feet, and then it grew to 11, it grew to 12, but now we should do 10 feet again, and we understand that wider is less safe. You have streets like Congress, which you're seeing here, a 3-lane section, right? 1 lane towards us and 2 away. So it should be 30 feet. Well, it's 45 feet. So that's 15 feet of extra pavement that can be put to better use. And if we do so, it'll be much safer. You have St. Joseph's in this location, whatever the traffic pattern may be, you see that what should be 8, 10, 10, 8, right? 2 parking lanes and 2 driving lanes, 8, 10, 10, 8, therefore 36. Is actually 45, so there's an extra 9 feet there. And so, we'll be looking for opportunities to take advantage of this, either perhaps by introducing angle parking or more likely by putting bike facilities in the street. Now, not all streets carry a lot of traffic. And when a street carries quite little traffic, the safest trajectory is actually one that is what's called a yield lane. It can be as narrow as 12 feet wide and it handles traffic in both directions. That may be appropriate for some of your downtown streets as well. And narrow lanes like that are already happening in the neighborhoods around downtown. This is Dearborn Street, and I take pleasure in showing this slide because not only can I show you an already existing yield street, but this is the first time in 30 years of practice that I could put my brother's car in a slideshow. So that's for you, Scott. Now, parallel parking, I've been mentioning it a number of times already. It is an essential barrier of steel. If there's nothing else in place, it's an essential barrier of steel that protects the sidewalk from moving vehicles. I've been saying that for a long time and I needed some data, and then I arrived in Fort Lauderdale, and this is happy hour in Fort Lauderdale where I did a walkability study, and you can see that there's parallel parking allowed on one side of the street, on him or she Boulevard, which is a prime happy hour street, and no parallel parking allowed on this side of the street. Subsequent to my study, it was put back. But here's the happy hour on the parallel parked side of the street, and here's happy hour on the unparalleled parked, because no one wants to sit, 2 feet from cars going 40 miles an hour because the street's so wide. So the parking is really important, and this is a Dutch artist's representation of what it feels like to walk around a city when the sidewalks aren't protected by parallel parking. You have a number of streets, at least when these pictures were taken, that seem to need something on their edge, parallel parking or trees to make them safer. And here is the DPZ map, which we'll be taking advantage of and double checking, that identifies the places where parallel parking exists and therefore where it's missing. And we'll be looking for opportunities to supplement that where possible. Signals, something I didn't mention in my last visit to Mobile. This is art. This is not an intersection in Mobile. But this image is here to remind us that America is quite over-signaled. The study that was done, the one big study that was done, was comparing signals to all-way stop signs, which it turns out are a lot safer. In Philadelphia, they replaced 472 signals with all-way stop signs, right? Four-way or three-way, depending on the street, stop signs. Collected a lot of data. Crashes dropped by a quarter, severe injury crashes dropped by 63%, and severe pedestrian injury crashes by more than 2/3 when that change was made. So we'll be looking for opportunities in downtown Mobile to remove signals, which, by the way, over time also saves money because you don't have to fix it or replace it when it needs work. Bicycling here demonstrated by your mayor on the bike share, which is such a nice thing to have in a downtown. I like to say that bicycling is the biggest planning revolution currently underway in only some American cities. And it's the cities that are investing in it. This is Portland, Oregon, which created a huge bicycling population. They started out not so different from the rest of the country, and they invested $60 million in bicycling, but they did it over 20 years. That's not a lot every year. And they went from biking about the normal amount to biking 15 times as much as the rest of the country in a place where it rains almost all the time. The technology has evolved considerably since this picture was taken. The new standard that you see here in Pittsburgh is the protected bike lane, where you have the buffer for the door zone, but then the parallel parking that was on the curb is pulled off the curb and sits there as a barrier to protect the bikes from moving vehicles. I'm not sure why. One of these people, this guy's going the wrong way, right? This is a two-way, one-sided biking lane. Here we are in Chicago, a new lane there. For some reason, same mistake. But I wanted to show you this one on Prospect Park West in New York City, where you have to lose a lane of driving to do this. So a 3-laner became a 2-laner. And of course, the number of cyclists jumped dramatically, speeding dropped dramatically, injury crashes dropped dramatically, but remarkably, the street carries as many cars per hour now as it did before. And the reason is that people were basically speeding from red light to red light. Now everyone's driving much safer. And of course, the real lesson is that a street that has bike facilities in it is safer for all users, not just cyclists. But this being New York, of course, there was a drawn out 5-year lawsuit, but eventually the bike-hating NIMBY trolls grudgingly surrendered to reality. And I show this image to contrast it with this image, because no one really wants their daughter in the door zone. And what we've learned is that if you don't protect these lanes, people put stuff in them, right? Garbage pails, or here's the Uber pulled up in front of my building to pick me up, even though the parking lane is completely empty. No, he's going to sit in the bike lane. And people are always putting things in the bike lanes, and there's not much you can do about it. So where it's possible, where you have that extra 2 feet for the door buffer that allow you to squeeze a bike lane between the car and the curb, then that's where you want to put it. If you can't find the extra 2 feet, then this street is still safer than the same street without the bike lane in it. And you do have a number of streets that have an extra 5, 6, 7 feet in them, where inserting a bike lane would make it safer for everybody. So even if it gets parked in. So, people think of this as the image of the cyclist. Of course, that is no longer the cyclist that we're designing for. This is the cyclist that cities are trying to attract. And more to the point, if you look at the data, this is your typical cyclist. In other words, people think of cycling as an elitist activity, and that these lanes are for what we used to call the dentist from New Jersey, right? But in fact, fully 39% of folks who are biking to work are from the poorest quintile of income earners. So if you want to invest in the equity of your city and the fairness of your city and in those who have less, bike lanes are a way to do it. And of course, since I've been there have been some tremendous improvements along Water Street to the east, you have, I don't like the fact that it's unprotected, and we could talk about how potentially it could be protected fairly easily with a small amount of barrier. But you have these great new bike lanes well out of the road there. You have the plan for Broad Street. Here's the existing. It's under construction. It's going to end up looking like this. And there it is, right? This is actually the gold standard beyond the protected bike lane, is to have it out of the street with a curb. This is more the European standard. And you can see that due to a limited room, it's consolidated on one side of the street rather than on both, and that's perfectly fine. So you have this collar now not shown. I believe the DBZ plan is from 2013, so it was a while ago. You can see that they're identifying the existing bicycle network quite small in light blue, proposing these improvements in dark blue, not knowing what was going to come to Water Street and Broad Street. And you're going to have this ring of bicycling all around the city. Clearly, Canal is a missing link that's already being worked on to complete that ring, which is great. But I do think our plans will end up finding opportunity, because we use bike lanes to make streets narrower and safer, and not just to create a bike network. We're going to find opportunity for much more network of bikes in this zone. Crosswalks, no, this is not even in America, but it reminds me to talk about them. I don't often bring them up. You have opportunity in many places to add them, most notably on Canal Street, where there don't seem to be any. And then there's a few key areas that have been brought to my attention by Downtown Mobile and others, like this intersection where the Renaissance Hotel is and Conti Street ends, where everyone crosses, and yet there's been resistance at the city level to put a crosswalk in there because, it's very close, theoretically very close to two other crosswalks. Well, guess how many people take a minute out of their way to walk south and then north, or north and then south, to cross this street? Nobody. So the general approach to crosswalks is to identify where people are crossing and put them there, because you won't stop them. So you want to call as much attention to them as possible. And so the DPZ plan looked at opportunities there. We will be doing that as well. Now, I mentioned that restriping was often the best strategy and advised against much construction. I want to say that I'm not going to suspend all faith in the possibility that construction might be appropriate in some places. And with an eye towards economic redevelopment in particular, it may be that we end up making some recommendations about a more aggressive intervention somewhere. This is a project I love to show. I had nothing to do with it. It was done about 10 years ago by friends of mine, Moule and Polizoides, which is a design firm in LA. And this is for Lancaster, California. And you can see what the street was like before. Pretty typical California 5-laner. Yes, they made an investment, not a huge investment, but they did this. It was a $11.2 million investment. And you can see that they turned, pure tarmac into still a place with a lot of cars and a lot of parking, but much slower, calmer, right? The kind of speed of travel that encourages shopping. And that $11.2 million investment caused car crashes to drop in half, pedestrian crashes. Isn't it interesting how these numbers parallel when you make these changes? Crashes down 50%, pedestrian crashes down 78%. Pedestrian activity counts were doubled. 57 new businesses opened, 800 new housing units came online alongside this street, 2,000 new jobs estimated, and the economic impact of this $11 million investment was $282 million. So you tax that $282 million, you get certainly more than $11.2 million back to the city. So we will be looking for opportunities like this where we think that sort of investment does make sense. And interestingly, the number of car trips, they were willing to have fewer cars driving on the street after than before, knowing that there were parallel ways to get through the downtown. And what was essential here was vitality, not car counts. That's important as well. So that's all I wanted to share with you today. I'm going to hand it briefly to Allison, but before I do, I wanted to bring up a few things. I thank you, Elizabeth, for flogging Walkable City It is meant to be an enjoyable read, and I do hope those of you who have more interest in this topic and all the other issues surrounding walking, not just traffic and safety and downtown vitality, might take a look at it. For those wonky techie people among you, I would recommend my newer book, Walkable City Rules. This book is all words, no pictures, and is meant to be, hopes to be literary nonfiction. This is much more of a handbook full of pictures and graphs and charts and data for people doing the work. Even if you're just an activist and not employed this way, this book is for you. And then there's just a ton of resources, videos and projects and other things you can find at my website. So that's jeffspeck.com. Now, I want us to talk a little bit about our approach to this work and the week ahead. So I'm going to hand it back to Allison. Take it away.
Great, thanks, Jeff. So yeah, I just wanted to speak a little bit to, we're just getting started with this work and reviewing a lot of background plans and just discuss our approach to how we're going to be working specifically with Mobile. So as Jeff had said, this is a street optimization plan. And as we've been talking about with all of these examples of the streets that we've walked through, there's a lot of things that we're trying to get out of what our streets do for your specific community. And so our charge is to figure out what is the right balance of these, both in the overall network and with each specific street within that. Our scope and charge here is first, we're trying to get a grasp right now on what is the number and the direction of lanes, so the number per direction on all the different streets. I know that ALDOT and the city traffic engineers are on the call today. They've been very helpful in helping us piece together both what's existing, but also what's been changing recently. So we're confirming those recent and planned changes. And then we're reviewing those and understanding and identifying opportunities for further changes that could come out of that. Then we're going to have a number of meetings with a lot of stakeholders to discuss those needs of what are needs on different streets and what are those trade-offs before we dive into drafting a plan. This is just a draft map as we're getting started, but this is understanding the number and lanes and the direction of your street. This is also our study area, the specific area that we're looking inside of within Water, Canal, Broad, and Beauregard. And then we're also parsing the traffic data that we have. We have some volume data. We also have some count data, and we're going to be diving deeper into this to understand, what are the service needs from the vehicular perspective on each of these streets. So just in summary, we're trying to find what is the optimal combination of the trade-offs of all the different things that we need to serve both in the network and in the respective streets within downtown Mobile. And I'll pass it back to Jeff.
Great, thank you. Sharing my screen again. So the week ahead, I don't expect you to read this. In fact, this is our internal spreadsheet. Nothing embarrassing in here, but this is just for Allison and me to parse out the week that's coming next week. What I really want to tell you is that we have asked for meetings, and we've got about a dozen of them, with a bunch of different groups focused on a whole bunch of different issues and areas within the downtown. So there's a steering committee that's guiding our effort. We have two separate meetings because there's so many people interested in this with downtown development experts and actors who are actively developing stuff in your downtown, as well as meetings with merchants, with cycling experts and advocates, public safety professionals at the city, and then the two downtown neighborhoods, Detente Square and Church Street East, have meetings as well. And so, my charge to Elizabeth and her team, and I have to say that Fred and Carol and Elizabeth have been really amazing to work with in pulling this together, was what we do in every walkability study, which is to bring us the people who really have an expertise and are active in what's happening in the downtown. It's too bad that we're not there. I was going to say it's too bad that we're not from there, but in fact, that's actually a benefit. When you're planning a place, you kind of have to be from somewhere else, because if you live in a place, you're you're steeped in all of the impediments to change. You know all too well, what the problems are going to be. And when you're from out of town, you're able to be a little more, I think, ambitious in terms of seeing opportunities. But the disadvantage, of course, to being from out of town is that you don't know the area anywhere near as well as the people who live it and breathe it and work there. So the simple charge to our client was get us with all the people who can just help us to do a better job. And each of these meetings is going to begin with the exact same way, which is for me to say, well, I hope you came on Wednesday night, because actually it was a prerequisite to attend this meeting, either in person or to watch the video that's being taped right now, in order to come to these meetings next week, because we want to have a level of discussion that's quite elevated without having to go through the basics. But essentially to communicate that our job here is to figure out what changes we can make collectively, spending the least amount of money and the least amount of time that can have the greatest impact in the number of people walking and biking in your downtown core. And that's what we're going to be looking at. So what can you do? If you're watching this presentation, we have created a portal for all the other people that aren't part of these meetings. That's the wrong one. There it is. Sorry, that's out of place, or maybe from some other show. We've created a portal at the website downtownmobile.org. And you can also email us, and I will read personally, as will Allison and everyone, all of the emails that you send to this address, streets@downtownmobile.org, which is a email address at their website. And please just tell us about the issues that you see. Now, bear in mind that Allison showed the study area. This is for the heart of downtown, as clearly delineated by the streets that surround it, and not for any areas beyond. So we won't be looking beyond that area, and I apologize, our client is Downtown Mobile. However, anything within that study area, you can help us out by telling us what you know, what you've seen, particularly problems you've seen, and opportunities that you've seen where you have a certain expertise, and we really hope you will. And I believe that concludes my part of this conversation. Thanks so much for listening. We're really looking forward to presenting to you again when we have our proposals complete, and I'll hand it back to Elizabeth.
Okay, great. Thank you, Allison and Jeff. That was very helpful. I think it set the stage very well. I see that we have a couple of questions Q&A. I do want to remind everybody as they kind of drop off that they can, there's the email address that Jeff mentioned. There's also just a place on the website where you can submit questions, comments, suggestions, etc. And then Jeff, do you think you'll have time? It looks like there's 8 Q&A. Do you think you have time?
Yeah, I think, is Allison going to curate those questions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think we have about 10 questions in so far. So I was just going to read some of these off. So I have
a question about the non-motorized study, and I think we've supplied that to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one person was making sure we know of some of the recent plans. I think we can just remind folks that I think we have about 15 to 20 different plans. We're trying to make sure we're building on past planning efforts, including that one, which is a very important one. So thank you. We have a lot of just comments in here. Thank yous and excellence and good job, brother. I
wonder who sent that.
One simple question maybe we can tackle is just when the proposal from this plan will be complete. Jeff, do you want to answer that?
Actually, Allison, you're in charge of the schedule. Do you recall?
Our goal is to be done in early 2021 with this plan. The bulk of our work is this fall, and we'll be refining a draft plan by the beginning of next year.
And I'm actually now myself reading some of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
Someone, Grant Saltz is, and I hope you don't mind me saying your names, is clearly has some experience working with this sort of effort, because the fire department, the question is, how do you deal with the fire department and the set spacing that they think they need to get engines through certain areas where parking is needed, as opposed to multiple lanes. That is a challenge wherever we work. And you're right, often there's a standard, right? As opposed to a design solution, there's a standard width that fire departments like to see applied to streets in terms of keeping them clear. So you want to bring back parking and you can't because there's a demand to get trucks through. First of all, let me say that compared to other places I've worked, the standard, as I understand it, in Mobile is not as tough, is not as really preposterous as I've seen in other cities. So I don't think we have a great challenge with that as we could have. However, there's often a design solution that would trump a standard solution. And my basic strategy when it comes to things like curb radiuses that fire trucks demand, which is often a standard, and clear zones that fire trucks demand, is to say, let's look at the specific location and see if there's perhaps a design solution that gets the fire department what they need while also providing the multimodal and more business directed use of the street. Have you seen the bike lanes on Water Street? I think this was asked probably before I showed them. Do you think they are at all viable, or does the inherent danger of their design make them of no real value? As I suggested, I would like to see some sort of vertical protection in that zone. There is a buffer, but they're not protected. And actually that's a technical difference between a buffered bike lane and a protected bike lane. So we can talk about the opportunity to put something in that zone. I think, you know, that's a very high speed street. So it doesn't feel that safe biking in it, even with that, what is it, 4 or 5 foot gap between you and the cars. So we'll look at that. But I think some sort of, you know, city willing, some sort of physical object would make a big difference. Allison, do you see another good one to talk about?
Yeah, there's a question about the residents at Meridian at the port and the hundreds of residents there. So it kind of goes hand in hand with that.
Is that within our study area? Oh, that's the new building that's up there. Yeah,
yeah.
Lovely. When I was last here, it was under construction. We've been looking quite pointedly at that corner. It's interesting that the front door of that building faces an intersection which you can't cross, and that you have to go a little bit to the side in order to cross an intersection where there's a new light just put in place, I believe a hawk signal, if not a full-on light. I'm curious to hear more about that because I'm wondering whether people are jaywalking across the center of that intersection where they're not allowed, or if it's not too much of a hassle to do the dog leg back and forth, because the desire line is in this place that isn't safe. We will mention that one thing we noticed about Water Street and Broad Street as it circles the downtown is that some of the intersections are just normal intersections, 90-degree intersections, and some of them have these huge slip lanes in them in addition to the to the straight travel lane. And slip lanes are very unsafe. Slip lanes encourage speeding. They encourage drivers to not look for pedestrians. The driver's looking over their shoulder at the traffic coming while the pedestrian might be crossing in front of them. That's a construction cost. You can't do it with just paint. And so it's a greater cost than some of the other things we might propose. But it's clear to us when we look at that section of the plan that it would be great to turn those slip lane intersections back to normal, three-way intersections. We're also ardently interested in that main intersection right there to the north of the Meridian at the port, where all the highways come together. And if there's a big ticket item in our plan, it might be a roundabout at that location. But I think honestly, that's a long-term thing to consider with someone else's money. But we're going to look at that because that whole northern neighborhood is cut off from getting to downtown in any direct way because of the quality of that intersection.
Well, okay. Any other questions, Allison?
I think there's a few more in here. Someone was telling a story about Colorado Springs and some protected bike lanes they deployed there and some debate amongst the community. So they were wondering if out of this plan we can help with in terms of some messaging about the benefits in terms of the rollout of the plan itself.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why we do these efforts so publicly and hopefully grow our audience as we move through it is to create the enthusiasm in the community. I have to say, I've worked in Colorado Springs and I know it pretty well. And I think there's quite a distinction between your downtowns. Downtown Mobile already has pretty much a rather delicate network of streets. And if you look at the car counts, what you see there are that almost all the streets are less than 5,000 cars per day. This was not the case in Colorado Springs, and I didn't work on the project that is mentioned, but you know, there was a real trade-off there between heavy traffic and the perception of creating congestion by taking car space and giving it to some other use. I'm always very careful, you know, to explain that the changes we're proposing are to take advantage of extra space that will not butt up against congestion numbers. So when I look at a street like Government, I'm not going to suggest a solution in Government that provides fewer lanes than the current traffic numbers demand. Even though I know in my heart that that might be a better solution, I've kind of learned the hard way that you have to be able to tell the commuters, the automotive commuters, that we can achieve a ton of positive outcomes without impacting their congestion, you know, stress. So then you look at a street like Canal, which has almost no cars on it and enough lanes for 30,000 cars a day, and you say, okay, well, there's low-hanging fruit that we can work on.
Great. Another question about scooters, Jeff.
I see the question. I'm ready to be proved wrong, but in my experience, scooters are best being treated like and trying to behave like bicycles or people on bicycles. So, you know, bike lanes, we can now call them micro-mobility lanes and welcome scooters into them. Here where I live, bikes and scooters seem to cohabit quite happily. They're about the same speed, about the same risk. And, you know, when the scooters first appeared, a lot of people wanted me to come out and complain about them because they were threatening pedestrians and other things were happening. And it's true that scooters on the sidewalk are a threat to pedestrians, which is one more reason why I embrace them, because they give us an even greater mandate to provide bicycle infrastructure. Because if you provide good bicycle infrastructure, then you can solve that problem of the scooters being where they're a problem.
So among micro-mobility, someone's mentioning that there's a growing popularity of using golf carts in the area.
I welcome it. I do think, you know, they don't really fit in the bike lanes, but to the degree that someone wants to drive it on a city street and cause everyone else to drive more slowly, I'm happy to let them experiment with that and see how it goes.
I agree.
Did we miss anything?
I think that some of them are from some stakeholders that we're definitely going to collaborate with and discuss some of these topics next week. There's some more mention of some other background plans to review. There's some ask of, you know, are we going to be looking at the Civic Center redevelopment plans? I think we do need to keep that into consideration.
There was a follow-up on Colorado Springs to say that the proposed and much hated and removed bike lane did not reduce the throughput, in so many words, of the street. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I do know that I've worked in places all over, and generally in the Mountain West, we face more and more vocal opposition. You know, Colorado Springs is a city that's just much more in the car than Mobile. So I'm not confident, but I'm hopeful, and I have reason to be hopeful that we won't have so much pushback here. Someone lobbed me a softball. Do you find that motorists actually pay attention to speed limit signs? Are they effective in slowing traffic? And I talk a lot about that in my work, and it's a really important issue because speed limit signs, particularly if you have a district-wide speed limit, can make a difference. Like if you have a campaign and an understanding, and you proudly advertise, for example, a downtown speed limit of 20 miles an hour, which, by the way, I think we learned today that I think it was the government of the Netherlands that was imposing a citywide 20 mile an hour speed limit, that all streets had to be marked as 30 kilometers per hour. And if you wanted a street to be faster than that, you had to petition for it as an exception. When you have a rule like that that's citywide or downtown wide, you can create enough engagement that people actually begin to behave around it. You can also have impact with tremendous enforcement. Like if you happen to have tons of police out all the time, as they do in, what's the skiing town outside of Boise, Idaho? Sun Valley. Sun Valley is a town that is all super fat, super wide streets, but no one speeds there because everyone who does gets a ticket. In fact, I got a ticket I got a warning as I approached Sun Valley for the first time. And people learn that. Most cities find that that's not a very effective approach. And the main point I'd like to make is that as my whole talk, I hope, suggested, is that what determines the speed of people in cities is the environment of the city. You know, on a highway, you drive very differently than you do on a city. On a highway, you look for the speed limit and you set your speed based on that speed limit. If you're me, you set your cruise control for 9 miles an hour over the speed limit. But if you're in a downtown street, actually, you're not even looking for speed limits because it's all those different aspects of the environment. The opposing traffic, if there is any, the parallel parking, if there is any, the trees that hug the street make you feel less comfortable speeding, the width of the lanes, the number of lanes, all those things that I mentioned today, that's what's going to determine your speed. And that's why it's so important to focus on those and not so much on enforcement or speed limits to have the proper outcomes in a downtown. I forgot to say, don't ask questions tonight about your specific corner because those have the threat of piling up. But please submit. Well, we'll capture these and address them with the others that we get on the website. But anything you have to say about your own personal experience, please do. If you haven't already typed it in, please do email it to streets@downtownmobile.org.
Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it there. We're just slightly over an hour, and I know I'm certainly curious as to what's happening with the wind out there, and I know everybody wants to hunker down and be safe. So I thank you both, and I thank all 80 some odd, 90, whatever the number was, individuals who joined us tonight. We will post the link to this for the recording as soon as we get it from Allison in the morning, whenever tomorrow we get it. And please feel free to watch it again, share it with others, encourage others to watch it, and encourage others to think about how we can ever improve our beautiful city. So blessings to you all. Thank you very much. And we will see you again in a couple of months when we do another public meeting, right, Jeff?
Yes, and thanks so much for listening, everybody.